Hey guys, welcome to Critical Hit. I'm Kyle.
I'm Matthew.
And I'm David.
Today we will be reviewing The Amazing Spider-Man 2, the follow-up to The Amazing Spider-Man 1. Peter Parker has really gotten into the swing of being Spider-Man at this point, and his relationship with Gwen Stacy is going strong, except when it isn't, because he's really trying to figure out should they be together because of her safety, and also he made a promise to her father, and he's worried that maybe somehow his life as Spider-Man is going to interfere with this. At the same time, a young Spider-Man fan named Max Dillon has an accident working at Oscorp where he gains electrical powers and becomes Electro, whose fascination with Spider-Man eventually turns into feelings of rejection and neglect and outright hatred for this hero who has sort of disappointed him.
And at the same time, you have Peter Parker's parents' story being explored in the movie, with Peter Parker finally figuring out a clue to figure out that his dad actually worked for Oscorp, and that was a bad thing.
Yes.
And at the same time, you have Harry Osborn, who is apparently a childhood friend of Peter Parker,
Just
shows up, and they become friends again.
But he's dying.
But he is dying.
Because at the same time, his father is passing away from the same disease that he's getting. And so he's trying to figure out a cure that requires Spider-Man's blood.
Yes. And in order to get Spider-Man's blood, he teams up with Electro so that he can make the spider venom that his father worked together with Peter's father on so that they could heal the rare blood disease that both he and Norman Osborn had.
And at the same time, Peter Parker's aunt is secretly becoming a nurse, apparently, and trying to keep it a secret from Peter Parker, although she doesn't know that he's Spider-Man, so there's tension in the house because both of them are pursuing these secrets.
At the same time, Gwen Stacy is offered a scholarship to the University of Oxford.
Oh, that's right.
And she has to decide whether she's willing to continue in this relationship or this very complicated situation that she's found herself in with Peter. With this will they, won't they, will he, won't she relationship that's going on. Will she go to Oxford, or will she stay in New York with Peter? It's really, really difficult to say. So,
at the same time, we discover that Harry Osborn's company is being taken out from under him. And he has to struggle with the fact that the company he was planning on taking over has been removed from him. While he's discovering that at the same time they've created secret weapons that are not really explored for the rest of the movie.
While at the same time, he needs to get Electro out of the Ravencroft Institute.
Well, which is also there.
Well, that's all the time we have for our Spider-Man 2 review. Everyone, good night.
Okay, needless to say, this movie is very convoluted. It is full of so many plots. And rather than having the one real overarching plot, which was a strength of the first movie, this movie decided to give you a lot of different little tags. And in some ways, that does feel like a comic book story, where you have a bunch of little episodic incidents happening, and they all somehow tie together into an overall story. But I guess the real question is whether or not that works in a movie setting like this.
It's a question of pacing for me. All these story plot lines could have been good and fine. One, I think you don't need half of them. But they could have been fine in the movie if they just... It doesn't take so long. It's so... such a long...
Immediately as I finished watching the movie, I actually had a remarkable amount of difficulty remembering almost any specific thing that had happened, because the whole thing was so convoluted and there was no real broad arc to hook into. But like it really just felt like I was watching a movie that was made on just autopilot.
But at the same time, I do understand that there are a lot of strong suits in this movie. There's the opening is fantastic. We learn more about Peter's parents, and the interesting opening right before the movie begins. And then after that, with Peter Parker as Spider-Man, his interaction the first time with Max is fantastic, and he has a classic hijinks of his armored car being robbed. It's really a fun scene.
Yeah, let's be honest. There's a lot of good moments in this movie.
The beginning and the end of this movie is fantastic.
That's
everything
exactly
else I have
it.
a problem with.
There's this wonderful sense of who Spider-Man is as a character from the beginning, where you get to see all of the comedy and the sheer joy that there is in being the wall crawler. But at the end, you actually also get to see some of the sadder points, some of the more somber bits, while at the same time, this overwhelming sense of hope and determination and responsibility, which, as we know from the Sam Raimi movies, is key to who this character is.
Well, and I just wanted to point out one thing, that in that whole introduction we gave, we still forgot to mention one of the villains.
Rhino.
Yeah.
We forgot Rhino.
Which is understandable.
Who was beautifully used, because you can't make Rhino a main villain.
No.
You don't make Rhino a main villain. Instead, you use him to illustrate the fact that Spider-Man is active in this world, outside of whatever main plot you have.
Yeah.
And I think that actually Paul Giamatti knocked it out of the park.
Yeah.
And it was actually a really cool interpretation of the character Rhino. All I'm really saying is there's lots to be said for this. The chemistry between Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone is fantastic.
Yeah.
Jamie Foxx actually did a really good job portraying a very quirky character.
I thought it was interesting because he does actually have the same basic character arc as Jim Carrey's Riddler, back in Batman Forever. But it actually works so much better precisely because I'm not sure if I'd say he's a better actor overall, but at least he plays the part. He's actually less over the top than Jim Carrey.
Sure.
You end up actually...
That's not hard to be.
Exactly, yeah. But still, you end up connecting to the character that much more.
I just remember everyone seeing the trailers, everyone seeing the posters of Electro, and seeing Jamie Foxx's in them, and everyone just being so worried. They're like, oh man, he's going to ruin it. Oh, this is going to be terrible. No, actually, I don't have a problem with that at all. It's the majority of the rest of the movie I have an issue with. But, Electro himself was actually really well made. The character was interesting in his own quirky nerdiness. The fact that it was his birthday was an interesting little twist on how much of a bad day can you have before you finally just snap. It was an interesting point for that character.
And it turns out for him, it was to land in a giant tank full of electric eels.
That's a bad day.
To bite you.
And then thinking your hero betrays you.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically what I'm getting at here is there's a lot of really good stuff that has been brought from comic books into this movie. Comic book fans should be happy that apparently our pleas to the movie industry has been heard. They're giving us some of the things we want. And this continued trend of trying to build a universe rather than just having the individual episodic movie and then maybe doing a sequel that kind of tries to stand on its own, maybe building on the other one. That day has passed. We are in world-building territory. And I think that my main complaint about this movie is that it didn't world-build well.
It wanted to. It brings up all these plot points that you clearly going to be movies later on. So it brings up the Green Goblin at the end is constructing his secret group to become the...
For
another fantastic acting.
For no real reason, though. But, I mean...
Yeah, for no real reason, but
you don't know.
Trying to.
Yeah.
It introduces... What's her name?
Felicia,
there it is. It introduces her, who's Black Cat. You get these, moments of the movies trying to be look, we're going to make our own universe.
We saw the octopus arms. And
we saw the vulture wings.
References to Jameson and lots of minor characters.
But instead, lots of minor character references, but not a lot of minor characters. This movie just gets so fixated on Peter Parker
and his relation with Gwen.
And then all the millions of subplots they made for other characters that aren't like Electro's subplot and Harry's subplot.
Which and again, Electro's subplot, which really goes he has no real end to where he's going.
Do any of them have any conclusions? Maybe the
only subplot in this
Gwen
movie that actually has a sufficient conclusion, in my opinion, is the Gwen Stacy subplot.
Right. Which, as a comic fan, you're going to go to this movie and you're expecting that to happen. Every person that's read a Spider-Man comic, every fan of Spider-Man is going to know Gwen Stacy's going to die. And you go to this movie expecting that to happen. And I will say that scene delivered perfectly, in my opinion.
It was a good scene.
It was different from the comics.
Yes.
But I thought it was beautifully done.
I was incredibly satisfied as a fan for that scene. And I understand why they spent so much time focused on the relationship and all the quirks in it, just to make that scene more powerful.
Yeah. See, it was just so sad that the scenes that did focus on the relationship, for me, it was kind of... It just got so old because their entire relationship, it was in this kind of mire, and it wasn't like even in a really intelligent way. Like, it didn't feel like two people who were legitimately trying to figure out their relationship. It felt like two people who were killing time until one of them died. You know, like...
Part of that for me, though, was the way in which it was always just the two of them.
Yeah.
Again, it felt like this world...
Yeah, like...
Where's Mary Jane?
And they actually had the actress come in and film a couple scenes as MJ.
Really?
Yes, they actually did.
Oh my
but
goodness.
they didn't think that it felt right with this send-off for Gwen to actually put her in the movie.
Of course.
The problem is, all of the minor characters from high school who were... Flash Thompson is gone.
Yeah.
The one nerdy girl who could have been Deborah is gone.
We don't meet Jay.
We don't get to meet J. Jonah Jameson.
Yeah.
No hints as to Eddie Brock or any sort of job at the Bugle.
Yeah.
We get hints about it, but we don't actually get to meet any of those people from that world.
Well, and the things that they do focus on, they don't need to. Like, I mean, like the Aunt May thing, that didn't go anywhere interesting.
No, there's a really cute scene at the washing machine that was really fun and interesting.
Yeah.
But that was it.
With both of them hiding their secret from one another.
But like, that's
all we got.
And that's the thing is, the only place that Aunt May subplot it leads is to Harry finding out more about how. Oh my gosh! I just remember there was that intro scene with the airplane. With the airplane. I literally completely forgot about that. Like between seeing this and talking about it right now, I forgot that was in the movie because it felt so irrelevant.
That is so sad.
Here's the thing: that's the sad part for me is that like there's a huge emphasis on that from the beginning of the movie and throughout the last movie, Spider-Man 1. Huge emphasis on like, well, Peter Parker, your parents had some shady past. In this movie, it's brought up at one point.
The resolution it's just so lame because all it really amounts to is Peter Parker finding out that his parents left Oscorp because Oscorp was involved with certain like illegal and immoral dealings. Which I mean, that's the thing where you could literally have guessed that. Not from even seeing the movies, by reading like the first two sentences of like the first movie's Wikipedia page. If you were not able to guess that from the beginning, you really need to see more movies.
It would have been nice if we had actually gotten some extra hint as to what in particular they wanted to do with those weaponized genetics overseas.
Exactly, like just something beyond the most surface, like something that actually impacts a change within the plot itself.
But they couldn't do that because they were so focused on other plots, all of their other plots, that they had to give each one enough space on the film.
Now, let's be honest here. Part of the problem is that this movie isn't like the Marvel Cinematic Universe with the
Marvel
Avengers,
Studios,
where they can say, okay, we'll reveal this part of Avengers 2 in Thor 2, we'll reveal this part of it in Iron Man 3, and this part in Captain America. They don't get to do that. They have to try desperately to build a world that is going to reach to these big events so that they can match these other studios.
Yeah, so they can catch up.
So they're trying to play catch-up by pouring all of these things, all of these subplots into one thing. And rather than having a unified singular plot, they're having these little plots that they're hoping weave together into this web.
Well, it's like, imagine if like Captain America and Thor had both been the same movie.
Yeah.
Like that's honestly kind of how this felt. I mean, it would have been a little more disjointed, obviously, but in the broad sense, that is totally what this movie felt like.
See, now this isn't, and it's not even like the X-Men films where you can do a Wolverine film and then X-Men First Class and then go ahead and do X-Men Days of Future Past.
Mm-hmm.
This is just,
Spider-Man.
they're really trying to do something new. And they're doing it. They're even more restricted than DC is with trying to introduce Batman into their new Man of Steel movie.
Right.
This is one character, and their big idea for how they're going to expand on this is they're going to give his villains their own movie. This is difficult. In some ways, this is everything every nerd could have ever wanted. This is what we were begging for, but it's really hard to do.
Well, yeah. Well, see, this is actually kind of like the dark side of that Marvel Cinematic Universe approach, because what they're doing is they're planning out a franchise with all these multiple characters before even knowing that they can make us care about these characters in the first place.
Well, it's like the Green Lantern failure all over again. It's like we're going to start this universe thing, but it doesn't work unless you make that first sure foot of landing. The reason that Marvel Studios worked is because of Iron Man.
Well, yeah, and so what blows me away is that you have a movie like this, Amazing Spider-Man 2. They made it a certain way, in order to branch out into this universe. But this universe is not going to work precisely because they approached the movie as if they were branching out into the universe.
But here's the thing, though. They really did latch onto those characters that we cared about from the first movie. Mm-hmm. They really were working with that Gwen and Peter relationship.
Yeah. Right.
The problem is, that's good. You just need to somehow unite that to other plots.
Yeah.
When you're building a world, you can't just focus on this single thing that you did right and that people are already invested in.
Right.
That's fine. That's going to bring the people into the seats. But in order to make them care about that movie, in order for that to be a good story, you need to somehow make that unite well with an overarching plot that is different than just that subplot of a relationship. That relationship can't be the single plot of that movie. Or if it's going to, it needs to be more than just the level of a relationship that it was being portrayed as.
The movie tries. It tries so hard to do
It
that.
does.
With Electro, like, Electro's opening and introduction as a character as Max and then becoming Electro, and even his stuff in the prison as Ravencroft was really... It's interesting, and you're watching. You're like, "Oh, yeah. I'm interested. I'm invested in this character. I want to see why. How does he become such a nice guy to such a terrible person?" And then the movie just drops him.
Yeah, and it's
so sad.
In some ways, he was actually like one of the, he was like the best part of the movie. I found him much more compelling than Green Goblin.
Oh yeah.
See, I really liked
by a mile.
I liked Harry, but I didn't like Green Goblin.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, just like I liked Spider-Man, but not Peter Parker that much. Like the scene where Electro and Spider-Man have their first confrontation. That scene was excellent.
Why?
Because they get all the characters right in that scene. So you have Electro, who's just figuring out his powers, just coming to grips with he's a different person, and he sees Spider-Man, he's his biggest fan, and Spider-Man shows up, doesn't know the situation at all because there's a giant blue guy shooting lightning, weird. But Spider-Man handles it. He calms the people down, he gets people to back up, and then he starts talking to the guy. He does the Spider-Man thing. He's your friend, right? You have all the people in the background pulling out their cameras and being the terrible thing that crowds are at situations of just, we're going to make basically a perimeter of people to photograph and Facebook this event. And you have this moment where you see Electro is realizing that he's losing his chance to shine as a person. Like, he used to be on every TV screen in New York City because he had these crazy powers, he looked different. But then Spider-Man shows up and he's stolen that away from him. It was his one chance to be somebody.
This guy who was previously empowering him.
Right. The guy that he admired has now taken away his chance at being someone special. And that's all Max wanted to be, was someone special. And so there's this beautiful scene where you see him twist from good to evil and lash out, and you get it. And then you just don't get... You get a couple more scenes in the movie like that, but overall, you have to wade through the movie to get those beautiful moments like that.
It becomes much more hardcore after that.
Yeah.
And you really lose sight of who Max was.
But the later end of the movie, you get him as a thug, basically. Like, he becomes Harry's, tough guy. And you're just like, there was a chance here to make this character super interesting and worthy to be the main villain of the movie, and we've taken it away.
Now, I'll say that that's part of it here. Again, they start giving you these really good bits for building a world. But then they just don't deliver because, for some reason, they're not getting plot and character to match up well.
Yeah.
Somehow these things just are not working together. And I don't know what it is. I actually do know what it is, now that I think about it. They're trying... First off, they're trying to do too much in one setting.
Yeah.
Because they feel desperate to catch up with these other studios and to make this its own larger world, but not in any sort of subtle way. The other thing is they're trying to get to the climactic battle.
It's a very famous scene, yeah.
Yes, and it's...
And when it's a climactic battle with the villain who isn't the best villain of the story, and that's pretty unacceptable.
Yeah. Right. It's the Two-Face scene, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, I thought it. Whatever.
The Two-Face scene's better. Okay, I gotcha.
But it's so interesting to bring that up because in that way, this movie is actually following comics a lot more than I give it credit for. Because the comic industry is... the big two are so famous for doing this where they're like, oh, you have a character concept or a world idea, I'll copy it. And that's what... Like, it seems like Sony's trying to do that with Marvel Studios. Oh, you're making a lot of money because of the Avengers. Let's do that with the Spider-Man universe. And they're so fixated on being just like that and getting that audience to them that they're losing the opportunity to do their own thing. They're losing the chance to just be like, no, let's make these really well-crafted Spider-Man movies instead of trying to copy somebody else's story.
And I'm going to say I am all for them building a larger world where Spider-Man can engage with it. I think that's kind of a flaw of the previous ones, is that they were kind of isolated in such a way that it kind of mattered what happened in the movie before. But, I mean, really, it was always about the one bad guy has his plan, the good guy stops it. And so, in some ways, this is a bit of a reaction against that. They're trying to make a more intricate web of intrigue here and of multiple motives throughout it. and different motives. It's not just revenge, or it's not just I want to take over the world. It's
I mean, like you have Electro who just really wants attention.
Electro really wants attention.
Noticed.
Harry doesn't want to end up dying like his father in this horrific way.
Yeah.
And there's vengeance, but there's more going on than just that.
Yeah.
So on one level, these are complex characters with their own unique motives, but for some reason, this movie had something that kept breaking up the way in which these stories could intertwine. And sadly, I think that was the Peter-Gwen relationship.
It took up so much time in the movie.
Well,
and was very distracting.
It's a thing where, like, if you trace out all the many subplots, almost all of them do ultimately come to that moment where Gwen dies at the end.
Right.
And it's like and the problem is the movie was too long and too complicated for that structure to work. Like really, maybe if they had chopped off more of the subplots and made it more direct and made the Peter and Gwen relationship hit better, so I cared more about Gwen than I actually did, that may have worked. But as it is, it's just that's just not how a story of this complexity should function.
And beyond that, if we're trying to make something part of a series, a larger story than just this movie, you need to not just spend your characters in the way that they did with someone like Harry, who you have him show up and their friendship is rekindled, and I'm not knocking that. That was actually a really beautiful few scenes there. But you should have given more time for Harry to be his friend. That way the betrayal would be on both ends there. Would seem even more painful. It would, after we get to really like Harry, give him a full movie that way. And that's why in the comics, the original Goblin is Norman Osborn, and then later on Harry Osborn. But that's the same structure that happened in the original Sam Raimi trilogy there. And they weren't going to just recopy that. Because they're forcing themselves to think about this not just as an individual story, they also have to think about what other studios are doing, what has been done with this character in movies recently in the past that's fresh in everyone's memory.
Yeah.
People don't want to just see the Goblin again.
Right.
And it's getting really difficult to tell these same stories, and in doing so, it seems to be getting just a tad convoluted.
It's just a tad?
Okay, it's getting a lot convoluted. And at the same time, I really, overall, I enjoyed the movie. I liked going in there. I liked seeing the wall crawler. I was very touched by the scenes with the ultimate fate of Gwen Stacy there.
Yeah.
And a lot of these characters really made me feel.
For me, like, I know I really enjoyed scenes. And they're very, like, the opening, I loved. That scene with Electro and Spider-Man, Gwen's death was, I think, very well crafted. And then the conclusion with Rhino was also a great scene. But and all of those are worth the entirety of the movie. My problem is this movie starts strong, ends strong, but it feels like it just got so wishy-washy in the middle. It got so lost, and it entangled.
Now, here's a question. I wonder if we're being maybe just a tad unfair, because this is a little bit different. I think about Captain America, which we just saw.
Right.
And which we reviewed. And how that took place over a span of a few days and was addressing a single issue that had happened.
Mm-hmm.
But when we are dealing with this movie, part of what they were trying to do was play with emotion and tone and really stretch out some of these feelings. And it was a very different project in that sense. It wasn't just an action movie. They were trying to do romance. They were trying to spread this out so that you could see over the course of several months what's going on with Spider-Man.
Well, I think that anyone who went to or is going to see Spider-Man 2 with the mindset of the Marvel Studios movies, like how Iron Man, Avengers, Captain America, those kind of movies, they're going to get very frustrated with this movie because it doesn't work on that wavelength. It functions on its own. It tries to tell a story, I would say, in a very comic way, where it's episodic and there are multiple subplots with trying to reconcile them later on, like through issue 2 or 3, and they're just trying to cram that all into one movie.
In that sense, it's kind of experimental, and I like that it's trying to play with its source material.
I give it an A for effort. I just think that its execution, unfortunately, was not up to par with what we've been seeing with almost every other superhero story we've been told in film.
Yeah, I mean, which isn't that an interesting aspect though? I mean, I saw this movie in the theater and I thought, oh wow, okay, that was a bad superhero film, and that's a sentiment I think I feel so little nowadays.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
which is really amazing when you think about how the Marvel Marvel Studios has really changed that entire subgenre.
Yeah, between that and the Nolan Batman films, there was just such a revolution as to what we're getting here. And to the point that we're getting some fantastic stories and even some that we've never seen before, like Guardians, which is going to come out.
Yeah. And honestly, I do agree with Kyle that I don't think this movie is necessarily like, it's not so bad that you shouldn't see it. I think it's worth seeing. I think it has great moments.
I think if you like superheroes, you can enjoy this movie.
I think if the Avengers didn't exist, if Captain America the Winter Soldier didn't exist, if Iron Man didn't exist, I would actually say this is a really good superhero movie. But the fact of the matter is we have this almost oversaturated story style of superhero stories that we're getting kind of spoiled.
We are getting a little bit spoiled, and that's the blessing and the curse of this.
Yeah.
It's going to get hard, and I'm curious if we're not going to see a little bit more of this distaste for the slight slip-ups and how that might eventually lead to an oversaturation of this market, which will be a sad day indeed for us fans. You guys got any closing thoughts?
Not really. I wasn't a huge fan of it, to say the least. I think I made most of my criticisms pretty clear.
I will say personally that this movie reminded me why I love Spider-Man as a hero. And just seeing the way he would interact with the citizens, the way he interacted with the city at large, how he even bantered with his villains, the fact that he could be funny without having to be full-on Deadpool satirical, the fact that he could be noble and still enjoy what he's doing, the fact that he could suffer and yet rise above it. He was just a fantastic hero, and it's nice that, while I'm a huge fan of Batman, that we don't have to get the exaggerated version of every superhero becoming brooding.
Right.
So, all in all, I am reminded of what I love about superhero comics and about this particular hero from this movie.
For me, I know that this movie has a lot of problems, but it's not. I don't think those problems negate some of the scenes that are worth it. So, like I said, the Gwen Stacy death scene is something that everyone should just see because it's a really good scene for a superhero story. I love the ending with Rhino. I love these certain scenes. The opening's really good, and I think the good does outweigh the bad in this movie. But I would say go prepared for not getting exactly what you wanted.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time.